Good afternoon, New York, and the rest of our listeners around the globe. My name is June Stoyer, and I'm the host of the Organic View radio show. Our podcast is available on iTunes, Zune, and you can also visit our website at www.theorganicview.com. If you'd like to be on the show or would like to find out about sponsorship opportunities, please contact us at questions@theorganicview.com. Today's show is sponsored by Eden Foods, the most trusted name in certified organic clean food. When you shop online at edenfoods.com, enter the coupon code ORGVIEW to receive 20% off any regularly priced items, excluding cases. For other promotional offers, please visit theorganicview.com's website. And don't forget to check out our contest section.
On today's show, Tom and I are going to talk about the Dorchester County bee-killing pesticide debacle, as well as more censorship, and we're going to continue the discussion about bee declines in Australia. Also, we will talk about something called the MP3 programs. So first, I'd like to welcome to the show my co-host, Colorado beekeeper Tom Theobald. Hello, Tom.
Good afternoon, June. I'm looking forward to this discussion. As usual, there are some very important things we need to talk about.
I am too. I'm just curious, how are things going with the honey run?
Well, it's virtually non-existent. I have no business anymore. I wish I didn't have to say that every week. It's very embarrassing. But I've been pretty much put out of business. I have about a dozen colonies that I've been able to keep alive, but it's a loss. It's at a loss.
How are some of the other beekeepers that you talk to on a regular basis doing? I'm talking about the commercial beekeepers. Have you had any feedback?
A little bit. There's a code among farmers and ranchers where you don't pry too much. You don't ask them how many colonies they have. You don't ask them how much honey they produce. You don't ask a rancher how many cows he's got or how many acres he has. But you can kind of read between the lines, and because I know some of these beekeepers pretty well, they're candid with me, and they will tell me how it's going. And my general impression, and certainly this is not a scientific survey, but my general impression is that the honey production is down, perhaps down by 40% or more. Part of that is because of the fact that they've had to split their colonies so thoroughly to keep their numbers up. A colony, a strong colony that might have produced a good crop of honey, divided at some point during the season, now has to grow back to full strength and misses much of the potential honey crop. And so the net result of that is the beekeepers have to make the decision of how much effort and energy to put into the creation of bees as opposed to the production of a honey crop. They try to balance that, but the honey crop has failed, and we're seeing the smallest honey crops over the past few years that we've ever seen. It's just one more symptom of what's happening. So the answer to your question is the beekeepers, the commercial beekeepers, are in the middle of the harvest right now, maybe approaching the end, some of them, and it hasn't been particularly good.
Well, unfortunately, what you're experiencing is something that the folks in Australia will be experiencing very soon. As we discussed in last week's program with Jeff Gibbs, the interview was really, really powerful. We had a tremendous amount of feedback from all over the world in regards to what's going on down there, and unfortunately, mainstream media is not going to talk about it.
Well, that's an interesting aspect of this story. This is blockbuster news. The chemical industry has used Australia as an excuse for over a decade, and what they've said is they're using neonicotinoids extensively. The bees and the beekeepers are just fine, and the reason is that Australia is the last continent without varroa mites. No varroa mites. Beekeepers are doing fine. All you beekeepers in the rest of the world are being devastated by the varroa mite. It certainly isn't our chemicals. Well, you need to listen to Jeffrey's interview because it is very informative, but basically what he's saying is exactly what happened here in the United States and in any other country where these chemicals, the neonicotinoids, have been introduced. It's been devastating, and it's been devastating in Australia. But one of the interesting sidelights to this is that there has been nothing in the American media, not a peep, not a word.
Did you really think that they were going to talk about it? I mean, look at when Dan Rather interviewed you. They didn't touch all the parts of this discussion that they should have. They stayed away from certain parts of beekeeping, especially with the bee losses and what the possible causes were. They kept focusing on Varroa.
Well, my point here is, where is the media in this story? The American media, this is a story of global importance. They have bought the media.
Of course they have.
90% of the media, apparently, is owned by 6 corporations. This from the House organ.
They're starting in with their bee health advocacy propaganda in Australia also. The same garbage that they're peddling here, that they are genuinely concerned about the bees. Well, if they're genuinely concerned, why are they producing chemicals that, by design, were created to kill bees? No. It's ridiculous. But that's what we have.
Well, my point is, you won't see this in the American media. There's been nothing about it. Not a word.
Well, Tom, all we can do is just continue doing what we're doing. I know that the interview with Jeff Gibbs was very powerful. The feedback was tremendous. And I'm sure that it also sent a message to industry that, you know something, there are people that are not going to just lay down and let them do whatever they want to for the sake of market share. There are people that will stand up and fight this. They're not going to just allow industry to poison the entire planet. More and more people are aware of what these chemicals do, and that is something that needs to happen in Australia. And it will.
Well, we'll see how this unfolds, and we will certainly report on that, but we may be the only ones.
The next topic that I'd like to talk about is the debacle taking place in Dorchester County with their bee-killing pesticide management program. Tom, could you explain to our listeners what exactly happened?
The Dorchester County officials decided that in order to control mosquitoes and indirectly control the Zika virus, they needed to use a pesticide, a very toxic pesticide called Naled, an organophosphate, and they needed to do that during the day, and they needed to do that aerially with airplanes. Worst possible situation, and the end result was it killed much more than just the mosquitoes. And from what I know of the decision, it probably was a direct violation of federal law, unless they declared a formal public health emergency, and I'm told that they did not. They just went ahead and did it. And they do this probably in response to the ministrations of the chemical salesmen who tell them that this is what they have to do. There are some serious questions about whether the mosquito is the vector or not of the Zika virus. But the result was that at least one beekeeper lost a good portion of his operation. He lost 46 colonies out of, I think, 60 or 70. And I did a little figuring. They've sort of passed this off. The Dorchester County officials think that an apology is all that's necessary. I mean, this is important, but they're just bugs. I mean, what's the big deal? Well, here's the big deal. I ran the figures, and I figured as best I could what it would cost that beekeeper to replace those colonies. Probably would take about 3 years to get back on his feet. And during that period of time, he would be losing thousands of pounds of honey. And what it comes out to, depending on how you set the figures, it comes out to about $40,000 to $100,000 that was lost by that beekeeper. Now, this certainly deserves more than an apology in my view. This is a taking. This is a taking of private property, possibly illegally. They may have violated federal law in these aerial applications. And do you think there will be any sanctions? I doubt it. Don't hold your breath.
I doubt it either. The next subject that we have on the agenda is in regards to something referred to as MP3 programs. At first I thought this was some sort of a technical program, and this is a term that is used to describe managed pollinator protection programs. So, Tom, what are they, and what is the benefit of this?
Boy, what an interesting story this is, and it goes way back in my beekeeping career, all the way back to the 90s. In the 90s, we had the reappearance of a pesticide called encapsulated parathion, PenCap-M. And we began to see serious bee kills, just as we're seeing today. Not as bad, but bad enough. And we were in communication with the EPA. At the time, I was the vice president of the Colorado Beekeepers Association, and the president, Lyle Johnston, along with Gene Brandy, who's a leading beekeeper in California, were working with a member of the EPA, Jim Downing, and we were trying to work out a program that would protect the pollinators from these kinds of damages, and we were doing quite well. And the Food Quality Protection Act was in the process of being finalized at that point. This was about 1993 or 94. And the chemical companies began to realize that this Food Quality Protection Act would probably put some real restrictions in place. And so they went to Al Gore, and Al Gore suggested that we increase the number of people on this committee. Today they use the term stakeholders by manyfold, and the people that were added were industry people, and this was very quickly dismantled, and it's been going on ever since. In about 2005, the beekeepers, because of the problems that losses we were beginning to see from these neonicotinoids, and we might not have even recognized that it was the neonicotinoids at that time, but we knew that we were having severe losses. They formed the National Honeybee Advisory Board, NHBAB. This was a beekeeper group, and they advised the EPA, sort of a replacement for Gene Brandy, Lyle Johnston, Tom Theobald, Jim Downing. Well, that went on for a couple of years, and what the EPA found was that this NHBAB was not as manageable as they had hoped they would be. They were asking some difficult questions. So what the EPA did was it switched from the NHBAB, or it put the NHBAB under their program ongoing called the Pesticide Program Dialogue Committee. And they determined which of the beekeepers who were involved might be the most sympathetic to what they were trying to accomplish. A beekeeper I know well, and his intentions were good, and he's been giving tireless effort to these things. His attitude was, it's better to be at the table than on the menu. And he was the representative of the beekeepers to this Pesticide Program Dialogue Committee for quite some time. And then people will remember a couple of years ago when President Obama issued a presidential memorandum to protect the pollinators. And I've said it's like putting the burglars in charge of investigating the burglaries. The people in charge of this task force were the EPA and the USDA. And one of the things that came out of this task force was the EPA mandated these managed pesticide pollinator protection programs that were supposed to be conducted at the state level. What they were doing is they were abrogating their responsibility to protect the environment, and they were pushing it down to the state level. And all of these things from Jim Downing in 1993 up to the present were being manipulated by the puppeteers in the chemical industry who control the EPA. The EPA is just a division of the chemical industry, at least in the pesticide arena. They may be doing wonderfully in other arenas, but in the pesticide arena, they're just a mouthpiece for the chemical industry. Well, these MP3s were mandated down to the states, and let me just pull up a thing that I got from the president of the Colorado Beekeepers Association. She gave me some of the information on these MP3s, and I'm going to read some of what she said. The state pollinator protection plans suggested by the EPA through their new rule for neonic use proposed in 2015 and encouraged in the White House strategy to promote the health of honeybees and other pollinators provides no funding to the states to develop these plans, does not mandate the plans be developed, has no enforcement mechanism of any of the plans, and the plans are not regulated by any state or federal entity. So this is kabuki theater once again, and these people get away with it. Let's just take a look at what has resulted from all this consultation and all these advisory boards over the last 10 or 15 years. What have the beekeepers achieved from this? Well, one of the things that they've achieved is the 48-hour notice. The EPA has tried to put in place something called the 48-hour notice, and if you're a beekeeper and I'm an applicator, I can call you 48 hours ahead and say, June, I'm going to be spraying such and such a pesticide. It's toxic to your bees. You need to take whatever steps you need to protect those bees. What it does is it puts the monkey on the back of the beekeeper. In no other criminal activity that I'm aware of are the victims expected to protect themselves against the crimes, and it's on their shoulders. What the EPA has done is it has avoided its responsibility under the law, and here's how they've done this. What they've done is through administrative fiat, they've established policies which will violate the federal law. If I call you and I tell you that I'm going to spray and you have 48 hours, now, if you move those bees, that may solve part of the problem, but those label restrictions and those federal laws are intended not just to protect honeybees, but to protect other pollinators and a wide range of other beneficial insects. So whether or not the bees are there is irrelevant. If that spraying moves forward, and under the EPA's suggestion it would, that's a clear violation of federal law. So they've put a policy in place that provides for the violation of federal law.
Don't you love it?
A second thing that's come from all these years of consultation and great expense on the part of the beekeepers, it costs beekeepers about $1,000 a pop to go to Washington and participate in these advisory committees every time they're convened. Another thing that's come out of all of this is what the EPA crows about as the label changes. Well, what
label changes, Tom? I think they throw this out every couple of months just to see if we're paying attention. I don't know, because it's the same thing. They recycle the same garbage over and over. There's no new results. There's no results, period. It's the same thing. It's like putting a hamster on the wheel.
Go ahead. Let me expand a little on what the label changes mean. Essentially, what the label changes do is they draw a regulation from 30 years ago which says you don't spray blooming plants. You don't apply these products to blooming plants. And that might have had some effectiveness 30 years ago when we were dealing with the organophosphates and the carbamates, and their residual activity might be a matter of hours, a matter of days in some cases. And to not spray bloom made all the sense in the world, because once the bloom was done, the attractiveness of the bees vanished, and it avoided many of these pesticide kills. But we're talking about products, and this is not rocket science. This is well known. These are products that have half-lives of weeks, months, or years, in some cases decades. So what the EPA has proposed as a solution to this family of pesticides is to protect the bees during the bloom period, which might be 10 days. When that chemical, that pesticide, could remain toxic, poisonous for 10 years. In any other industry, in any private industry, recommendations of this level of incompetence would lead to dismissal, and yet the beekeepers are supposed to live with this. So those are the two things that we've gotten out of these negotiations, these advisory panels. But it's even more sinister than that. We found recently the MP3 program comes under the jurisdiction of the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture.
Oh, say it ain't so, Tom.
The National Association of State Departments of Agriculture. And what we learned just recently was that in 2014, the person who was appointed to the presidency of the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture was a woman by the name of Barbara Glenn. Barbara Glenn has an interesting history, and she may be a fine person, but her prior position was as a senior vice president of science and regulatory affairs for CropLife America. That raise any suspicions?
Come on. It's so cookie cutter. Wait, Tom, we've been doing this show for how many years, and it's the same play out of the same playbook. It's ridiculous. They should go to third graders. They could come up with a better plan. This is so obviously ridiculous, and yet they keep doing it. The public really just doesn't do much about it. They don't do anything about it. We need to get the same old cronies out of office. We need to get new blood in. We need to restructure EPA so that it will actually do the job that it's supposed to do. There's no more check and balance anymore. All they're doing is marketing services for industry.
We need to see some intelligent management here. The management of the EPA, and the pesticide portion at least, has been infiltrated with former pesticide company employees, just like Dr.
Same thing with USDA. This is nothing new. This is just the same old for how many years?
Congress has done nothing, and Congress is either asleep at the wheel or in on the con. This has gone on for years.
Congress will do something. Congress will do something, just like the congressman that communicated with us about his whole big effort to help the bees. Where was he after election? We didn't hear a peep out of him. No calls back, no nothing. So it's an election year again. What's going to happen next?
So the MP3s and the 48-hour notice and the label changes, those two, the 48-hour notice and the label changes, along with a few other things, are the conscious effort to negate federal law through administrative fiat. And it goes unaddressed, it goes unchallenged, and if the MP3s are instituted in the states, the chemical companies know that even though they're directing the EPA, they have even greater control over the state departments of agriculture. And so they want these decisions pushed down as low as they can, where they have the greatest chance to manipulate them in their best interest. This is what Evangelos Valianatos referred to as the pesticide mafia.
And unfortunately, he didn't really do much to stop it other than publish a book after he got his pension. In any event, Tom, to be continued.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. It has to be continued because this is an environmental disaster of massive proportions, and it's being covered up by the people who are responsible for it.
Well, next week we have Michelle Colopy from the Pollinator Stewardship Council, who's going to talk about the Ohio Pollinator Health Protection and Conservation Plan. So that'll be quite interesting.
Yes, this is a real-life
debacle there. Oh, yeah.
This is a real-life example of what we've been talking about, and we'll get into the details of it with Michelle. But this is what the chemical companies and the EPA have been doing over the past several years is very effectively herding us down the chutes to the kill line.
Tom, thanks for joining me today. And folks, if you have any questions, please contact us at questions@theorganicview.com. And by all means, listen to the videos that are on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel because we put a lot of stuff out there that is not necessarily available elsewhere. Thanks again for tuning in. This has been June Stoyer with the Organic View Radio Show. Have a great afternoon.